On the 100th episode of the Going Deeper podcast, we talk about discerning the importance level of different doctrines. What's up, Fathom Church, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast. This is your host, Kyle Knight, and these are just conversations that we like to have here at Fathom Church about certain topics that we hope that will help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in our podcast studio. Karina Boss is not with us today, but I've got our lead pastor, Chris Martin. Hello, Chris.
Hey there, Kyle.
Hello. You're looking nice and tan.
Well, back from vacation.
vacation.
And I'm more burnt than tan.
Really?
But, that's okay. That's all right.
All right. It'll
Once you burn, it starts to turn into a tan. So
yeah, nobody notices.
Hey, I've got something I want to share with you. Okay. Unplanned.
Uh-oh.
Kyle does not know what I'm about to say.
Okay.
Kyle, I was at Chipotle today. Okay.
No.
Which is not shocking at all. But at Chipotle today, as I'm standing in line, I looked over and the guy next to me in line was wearing a Qdoba shirt. There was a Qdoba employee in the line at Chipotle. And I thought,
says it all.
This is enemy territory. Like, what is happening here?
But I mean,
but it proves
debate ended.
It proves my point. It's a good segue into what we're going to talk about today.
There you go.
But it is, I'm just saying, it was treason on the highest level.
Yeah. I bet he just felt ashamed.
Yeah, I don't know. He should, when you put a piece of black tape over it, when on TV shows and things like that, they have to cover over branding. That's like maybe switch shirts in your truck.
Next time, just change your shirt, just so you don't know.
Yeah. So
wow, that's a big one.
That's a big.
But I mean, there you go. End of discussion. End of debate. Hey, that transitions us nicely into our episode today.
Yeah, today we're talking about is Chipotle better or is Qdoba better? No, that's not what we're talking about.
Chipotle, done. Shortest
episode ever.
Hey, this is our 100th podcast episode.
100th
episode of the Going Deeper podcast.
A century of podcasts.
So hey, if this is the first one you're listening to, church, you've got a lot to catch up on. Like, you should probably go back and start with, you don't need to go back and start with episode 1. But hey, this is our 100th episode. So as you saw in the title and what I said earlier, we're going to talk about what's called the theological triage, but things of kind of categorizing theological issues with importance. That can explain to us what this theological triage is. What does it come from? And we talked about this before we hit record. We've talked about these sorts of things quite a bit over our 100 episodes on the podcast, but just here and there. And this will be a good chance to kind of bring them all together and kind of organize this in some good ways of thinking about all these kind of things.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about issues that are matters of conscience. We'll say that kind of phrase a lot in this podcast where there may not be chapter and verse in the scriptures concerning something. And so then we would leave something open to a matter of conscience. There would also then be moments in this podcast where we're talking about a theological doctrine that's a bit more defined and definitive from the scriptures. And we would say, hey, this is actually more of an essential doctrine or, a secondary doctrine, things like that. But the question that I want us to talk about in our 100th episode is really something that kind of overgirds all of our episodes, which is, how do you know? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you know how important something is in the Christian life? How do you know what's primary, what's secondary, what's tertiary? Like, how do we do that? And that's what, it's a novel term to say theological triage, but that's what you're doing is you're trying to discern, like, where does this fit in the larger scheme of things? And there are lots of guys who have written lots of different things about this. There's lots of different models and thoughts. Mm-hmm. But we thought we would just try and work through some broad stroke categories of different theological issues and ranking them and trying to with those issues figure out where they fit in some sort of pecking order or hierarchy so that we're not making a major thing a minor thing, or making a minor thing a major thing.
Right. And we have talked about a lot of these in the past, and how that relates to churches, how different churches do sorts of things, how we do some different things. And so, from the whole, I mean, we've talked about from things of first importance, primary importance, but also to those secondary or tertiary kind of things. So we'll kind of get into some examples of all that, and really like where Fathom stands on a lot of these, and what some examples of these certain things. But let's start with, do you want to mention this article? And we could even
so I think we should share this article.
Yeah, we'll put a link to this article.
There's a professor at Western Seminary named Gary Bashir, and he has an article that we'll link to that's talking about kind of 4 categories that I like. Additionally, there's a book by Dane Ortland. Hold on, I'll pull it up because I wrote down exactly what it's called, and we can link to like the Amazon link for this one as well. But it is it's by Dane Ortland, or I'm sorry, not Dane, Gavin Ortland. Dane is the one who wrote Gentle and Lowly, which a lot of people at our church have read. Mm-hmm. Gavin is his brother, and he wrote this book called Finding the Right Hills to Die On, The Case for Theological Triage, which is a really accessible book. The Gospel Coalition, I think, had a hand in publishing that book. So between those 2 resources, that article and that book, they really come up with like 4 categories of like levels of importance when it comes to doctrinal or even ethical issues. Mm-hmm. So the 4, I'll just quickly give us the 4, and then we can kind of dig into each one. But the 4 categories are issues that we would die for. That's like the top, die for. Mm-hmm. The second category would be issues that we would divide over. So these may not be issues we die for, but it would be good and right. It'd be hard and difficult to maintain fellowship in a local church if we disagree on some of these divide over issues. Okay. The third level of importance, they would say, is debate. These are issues that we can debate, which means we may or may not need to break fellowship, find a new church if we disagree on these things, but we can have healthy, respectful debate concerning these issues. And then the fourth one is decide, like decide for. So it's and decide is really, these become things that are issues of preference. They are much less important. They frankly are superfluous when it comes to whether I should be in fellowship with other believers around these issues or not. So we have die for, divide over, debate, and decide for. So those are the 4 categories that I think would be helpful for us to kind of dig into and talk about, where do things fall? How do we know how important something is? Is it, and this is a good exercise, especially when you're thinking about finding a church, or you're thinking about, should I stay at this church? I just found out they believe something about this. Well, I think you can look at these stacks, these categories, and say, well, is this a die for? Is this a divide for? Is this something we can just healthily debate about? Or is this really a preference and I can decide or not to care about this?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. We all kind of look at these things as we're figuring out what church we want to be at. But hey, even if you've been at Fathom for a long time, you see this kind of stuff in D group. Like if you're in D groups, and we're having different conversations about the text, and people have different opinions about certain things. And we even kind of talk about this as like a staff and elder team, as we are putting together, whether it's different programs or classes and that kind of stuff. And we're talking about the die for, the things that we would die for, the things that are kind of primary to us. And so this kind of, this is all over the place. And you see now of people just, whether they're leaving churches or getting just little arguments or fights over all these sorts of things that maybe should be in different categories or really different levels and stuff. And so I'm glad that we're kind of talking about this and putting these all kind of in these categories. Hopefully this helps you think about these categories a little bit, but let's start Like, let's start at the top.
Okay.
Because that's a good place to start. These are the, again, according to this article, we're going to use this verbiage for this. These are things to die for. So things that are really foundations of the faith. So Chris, give us some examples. You kind of touched on some of these, but like some actual like theological issues, terms, beliefs that these would be things that we here at Fathom die for in this category.
Yeah. So die for, I think it's actually the easiest of the 4 categories to define.
It should be.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Now here's why, because these are things that tend to be historically agreed upon. Okay. There's words that we use when we talk about die for issues. We talk about essentials. These are essential matters.
Right.
We use the word orthodoxy. These are matters of orthodoxy. That means of truth, of historical orthodoxy, what Christians have believed. Sometimes we talk about the creeds, like the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the biblical historical Christian creeds of our faith, as a place to find a list of these die fors, these essentials. But all of those, the main thing about the die for is that denial of the doctrines in this category is essentially a denial of Christianity. It's a denial of the core essence of what biblical Christianity is. Disagreement around these is a disagreement with the historical orthodox doctrines of our faith. So the reason why I think these are some of the easier ones is because they've just kind of historically been laid out for us. So some examples, okay? The doctrine of the Trinity, right? One God in 3 persons. The doctrine of the Trinity is an essential doctrine. It's found in all the major Christian creeds. It's found biblically. It's found theologically. I mean, it's all Trinitarian belief. One God, 3 persons. Monotheists that believe that there are 3 persons working under the Godhead. That's an essential. That's a die for Trinitarian theology. The divinity of Jesus, Christology is what we call it in theological terms, but that Jesus is fully God. Okay, that is an example of a die for. Justification by faith, that we are saved by faith. Ephesians chapter 2. I mean, this is something that must be agreed upon. The authority of the scriptures. I mean, that the Bible is authoritative, like these, and I could go on and on. I could go on and on. The virgin birth is actually one of these, right? So we could go on and on. But what I'm saying is, die for issues are issues that if you disagree with them, you are disagreeing with Christianity. Right. You're in a different camp, as it were. And so if there is a church or a pastor or a ministry or a movement that denies die for doctrines, you need to run fast from that camp.
And listen, there are churches now that are
just got to be careful. You just got to be careful here, because the word, the theological word that goes along with this rejection of die for theologies is a word called heresy. The historical heretical teachings that are anti-scriptural. So that's the die for category. These are things that you kind of have to believe them to be Christian.
That's good.
So that's first,
probably the easiest. The easiest one,
or at least it's the least. I mean, you can still debate. There might be some debates between like Roman Catholics and Protestants. There might be some debates over certain pieces of that, but pretty generally, these are universally agreed upon by Orthodox Christians.
Yeah, and as we kind of fall down the categories, I think that's where denominations kind of come from.
Right,
and people start separating off a little bit, church styles, all those sorts of things. So the next one is divide for, divide over. Things that you would, people in a church, in a local fellowship would divide over. So what does this kind of mean, and what are some examples of this one?
Yeah, so the divide for category, which by the way, I don't think is a problematic category. I don't think there's some pie in the sky, we just all agree upon everything all the time,
Right.
kind of experience of Christianity that's even reasonable. I mean, you even see dividing happening in the New Testament.
Right.
Like Paul and Barnabas divide over their decision to bring John Mark along.
Yeah.
Right. So there is
Yeah.
division happening at the very earliest stages of the Christian movement
Right.
that isn't portrayed as problematic. It's just portrayed as, hey, we disagree on these things.
Yeah.
And so we've got to make divisions. So like you said already, denominations are a part of the divide for categories. Okay. These are not essential issues of personal salvation. Okay. So that's why these aren't die for, these are divide for. They're not matters for personal salvation, but they often necessitate division, especially at the local church, denomination, or ministerial level. Okay. So these, some examples here, view on baptism. I think your view on baptism is dividable.
Sure.
Like you cannot say that you believe in infant baptism and believer's baptism because those are two incongruent systems.
Right.
Though both are biblically defensible, they fit very clearly under Orthodox Christian teaching, but they are different systems of understanding what baptism is. And so I think it's completely fine for Presbyterians to practice infant baptism and Baptists to practice believer's baptism.
That's a perfect example of how we do things here at Fathom.
Right.
And whenever we do baptisms, we explain, this is how we do it here, believer's baptism. But if you believe, we're not like kicking people out the door.
Right.
If you
now,
believe in.
I say this is what I would consider a dividable doctrine.
Right.
I don't think you have to divide over this.
Right.
For you,
Good
it
point.
may not be a dividable thing. Like you might say, hey, I actually prefer an infant baptism, but I love Fathom and I want to be at Fathom, even though we practice a believer's baptism. Okay, that's totally fine. But just historically, Baptists kind of hang with Baptists, Presbyterians kind of hang with Presbyterians. We can love each other and share all sorts of things, but this is a dividable issue. Okay, so I think baptism is an example. Modes of church governance. Are you elder led? Are you pastor led? Are you congregationalist? I mean, different types of governance structures. I think these are issues that we can like even the Lord's Supper, how you do the Lord's Supper, or even what's happening at the Lord's Supper. I think these are secondary issues. They're dividable issues. It would be very hard for me to remain in constant fellowship for a long time with people who disagree with me on these things.
And it seems like some of these, or most of these that you said, are like things that we do, like sacraments, the things that we do within the church, also what you believe in, but how you practice certain things. They are issues of conviction. And so you should have your convictions on these things. I think that's an important thing to know what you believe about these things. And those, it might be difficult to regularly fellowship and worship with other believers if they disagree with your convictions on some of these things. So I think there are plenty of things that we could say are issues that we could divide over. And I don't think that breaks church unity. I just think that we understand theology in different ways. And that's just some of the beauty of the tapestry that is the Christian church. Well, and let me ask you this as the pastor of our church. What if there are people that some of these things we just mentioned in this category are they think those are my to die for, and they are strong and hard in that? What's some encouragement you would give to somebody who is kind of in that camp?
So I'd be careful with moving anything into the die for category. I'd just be really, really careful, because what you're saying in the die for category is if you don't believe this, you're not a Christian. And that's the difference. I think there are plenty of things that you can say divide for, but die for is where you move into a dangerous place that's called legalism, right? Where you must do this or practice this or believe this if you want to be saved.
Mm.
And essentially you're saying, if you don't agree with me, you're not a Christian.
Right.
And that's a very arrogant, dangerous place to get, pharisaical even. So I would be very cautious. If you've got divide for issues, great. You can have those convictions full force. You can disagree.
But just know.
That's different than saying, if you don't practice infant baptism, you're not a real Christian.
Yeah.
That's the difference between divide and die.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Third category is these are things that you would debate over.
Yeah. Okay. So the debate for. So this is where it gets a little bit turbulent, because divide and debate, those are pretty interchangeable.
Sure.
Depending on the conviction of the person. Okay. So some might think that baptism is actually a debatable one more than a dividing over one. And I think that's okay.
Sure.
I think that's okay. But the debate is, these are important issues, but they're not urgent enough to justify us breaking fellowship, finding a new church, as it were. Okay. Like, we should be able to maintain fellowship in our church, even if we disagree about these areas. So that's this debate. We should be able to have debates about these things. One of the big ones that we talked about last year when we were preaching through Matthew's gospel last summer and the end times is that eschatology, how we read end times prophecy, how we believe about the second coming of Christ. I would say a die for is Jesus is coming back.
Right.
But then you get into the finer nuances of eschatology and the end times. And I think that's something we can debate and have meaningful, robust conversation about without needing and necessitating a break in church fellowship. So I would say that kind of thing, timing of millennium, that those sorts of things, even things like the age of the earth, how we see those types of issues. Debate for issues could be issues around like drinking alcohol, morality issues could fall into here. This is where I really begin to open hand with the issues of conscience here, right? These are matters of conscience, where different Christians can disagree and still maintain unity in the same church fellowship.
Yeah, and I think the article that we linked to this, I think it kind of says like we can wrestle with these things within a church or denomination. Like it says maintaining regular fellowship and regular worship with each other, but also wrestle with these things.
Yeah.
So those are good.
So those debatable issues, again, like I said, they might ping and pong for different people between divide for and debate for.
Yeah.
But I think both of those categories, we want to be real charitable in our dialogue with other Christians. Again, these are not matters for personal salvation. These are not die for issues. If a die for issue is actually something that is like in a debate for, which, by the way, there are some Christians who think that end times is a die for doctrine,
right?
And like their view on it is the die for piece. And it's like, I mean, you're just excluding a huge segment of faithful Christians there needs to be a bit of humility to say, yeah, we might have strong stances on this, but we could be wrong. We could be wrong. These aren't crystal clear, especially as the die for issues are.
Yeah, that's good. And then, I mean, we can go into the last one, which is these are things the article says would decide for. What does that mean?
Yeah, I just think, decide for, I think these are issues of personal opinion. Like these are almost preferences, and they are largely unimportant. And I don't mean that
largely unimportant, not like,
I don't mean that they don't matter at all, but they really, they become preferences, matters with very little doctrinal consequence. Okay. So these are some of the silly things that we see people sometimes divide over.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a preference. Musical style is a preference. Pews or chairs it's a preference.
That again sounds silly, but people can kind of raise that up to the divide.
What you should wear to service, dress codes or something like that. Even like some of the things that we do, like preferences. I prefer no verses on screens because I want you to open your Bible. That's a preference. you don't need to leave the church over that. And you shouldn't not go to a church because of something like that.
Right.
Like these are just, you can decide whether you like it or whether you don't like it, but it would never necessitate you leaving a church or breaking fellowship with Christians over these things. So these are very minor disagreements and should not disrupt unity.
Right.
Unfortunately, all over church history, we see minor things being made into major things. It's church carpet color. Yeah. It's, they misspelled something in the bulletin. It's, really, really minor things where you've just got to get over it and decide, I would prefer there be no typos. Great. Okay. Man, I would prefer that we sing, that new song instead of this other song. Okay. Fine. You can have preferences. Absolutely. We're not saying you just become some automaton who just does whatever we say as a church. But you better really, really think through leaving a church over a decide for issue.
Well, and I feel like these are the people that when you are looking for a church have your huge checklist of trying to find the perfect church. Like, I'm going to find it with this style of music, what the building is going to look like. Is it like all this kind of stuff? And if you're trying to check off all those on your preference, you're not going to, because there's not a church unless you plant your own church and start your own church, and like you're not going to find even all your preferentions.
And even then, I promise you don't get all your preferences checked.
You don't. Really?
I don't.
You don't.
Believe it or not, there are things I would change about this church if I could. But like, I think those categories are helpful.
Yeah.
Like, at least in considering when you're thinking about an ethical issue, a preferential issue, a doctrinal issue, I do think that having that framework, that rubric to say, okay, is this die for, divide for, debate over, or decide for? And if I think that through, and then I think about what I'm thinking about, whatever that doctrinal issue is, that theological issue, I can then say, okay, this is actually maybe a dividable issue that I disagree with my church on. I should really have some meaningful conversations with my pastor, with an elder, with my D group leader to say, is this something that I should really consider? Is this going to be hard for me in the long run to continue in fellowship here over these things? Or it's like, oh man, this is actually something that's just irking me about how they do something. And it would be immature and foolish of me to break fellowship over this. Right. I think this is a tool to be used in exercising wisdom in the Christian life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what kind of encouragement would you give for our church, for being a part of a church body and dealing with each other with these sorts of things? People who in a D group, or that you don't agree with certain, whether it's bigger things that you might divide over or preferences, like how do we as a church love each other through and show each other grace through this, all these different things that happen in a church?
Yeah. I mean, I think the rubric allows for you to hopefully be gracious where grace is needed. Right. So if you and a person in your D group get in a big old debate about whether it's okay to drink wine on date night or not, let's just use the alcohol one as one, because it's just an easy example. I think that the alcohol conversation is a debate for conversation. I think there are good reasons to abstain from alcohol. I also think there are good biblical allowances for moderation in consuming alcohol. And so I think it's a matter of conscience. We've talked about this on this podcast. If you want to know,
I was going to say, go back and listen to one of our.
We've talked about this. I think if you understand that issue, then you're in D group and somebody's like, oh, well, we had a great trip to Napa and we went into a vineyard and man, this wine was so, you don't have to be offended by that. You can say, hey, I choose to abstain from alcohol because maybe I've got background struggles with that. Maybe I've got family history of that. Maybe I just don't like it and I don't want to participate in that. But you don't have to fly off the handle and say, you shouldn't drink. Christians don't drink. In your theological triage where that falls in the pecking order, and you say, okay, I can extend grace there. On the other side, though, is that you know, or should know,
Mm-hmm.
when something is eerily off doctrinally.
Yeah.
Because if you know the die for things and you're familiar with the divide for things,
Mm-hmm.
then if there are major doctrinal changes happening in your church, whether that's from the elders or from the pastor,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's from a book that they're promoting or something like that, and you're starting to say, well, this sounds fishy, you should be able to then look at that rubric and say, are they moving into heresy?
Mm.
Are they changing, as it were, teams on a dividable issue? So this will happen. Here's a ripe example. I think the view of the roles of women can be a dividable issue and it can be a debatable issue.
Right.
I think it could fit into either category,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the person who is and the seriousness with which they think that doctrine holds. But I think it's okay to be in either one of those categories. Well, there are a lot of churches who in recent years have moved from a traditional complementarian stance to a traditional egalitarian stance, as in moving from women not being elders to allowing women as elders. And I think if you're at a church that makes something like that, a change like that, and for you, that's a dividable issue, I think you should prayerfully and in good relationship with your church leadership, have that discussion and try and discern, is this something that I need to divide over? Because that's a bigger ticket item for you.
Right.
If it's not a big ticket item for you, then you can just say, hey, I can agree to disagree, and that can be a debatable issue. But these categories help us kind of keep everything at a balance, so that we're not just taking a little thing and making it a mountain. What do they say? Making a mountain of a molehill, right? Like we're not doing that. But at the same time, we have the wherewithal to say, hey, this is actually a big deal thing. And I need to really prayerfully consider if this is the right church for me.
Yeah. And here's my hope for our church who's listening is hopefully you see this, and maybe this is like a good, a good practice to do something that you can like actually sit there and go, you know what? I've never really thought about all these different categories. Where do I land on some of these things? I think it's a good practice to kind of go through some of these things and make sure you're at the right church, you know?
Yeah.
This is a good way of organizing kind of the things that you, again, would hopefully die for, but especially those other pieces of like, what's of high importance to me.
This should promote unity ultimately. Knowing these categories should promote unity within the body, because you should be able to see people who you disagree with and say, that's okay. That's not a big deal.
We say it all the time, unity, not uniformity.
Yep. That's
unity.
Yeah. And so it should promote unity, but it also should promote unity, because it might be like, actually, I do need to find something else where I can really be united around some convictional issues. Okay, great. Great. I think that's totally fine. So I hope that as people use their brains, turn on their brains, use some of these tools, it will help them in kind of doing that triage. You know, when there's something going on, they'll be able to critically think and analyze and hopefully discern the level of importance of some of those doctrines.
That's good.
So there you go.
That's awesome. There you go. 100 episodes.
100 episodes.
Done.
We'll see how.
No more.
We'll see how the next century goes.
We'll see how the next 100 episodes go. But thank you, Pastor Chris, for this discussion around this. Hey, if you have any questions, or if you're going through this and you're like, I'd love to hear more about certain ones of these, or where we might put some of the, like we always say, and we've said for these 100 episodes, and we'll say for the 100 more, email us, talk to us about anything that you'd like us to talk about, any suggestions, any ideas that you would like to hear us debate over or decide for, all those sorts of things. But thank you, Chris. Thank you, church, for listening, and for listening for 100 episodes, or if this was your first one, welcome. Hopefully you listen again. But thanks, church. We'll catch you next time. Bye.